Good morning, John. Good morning, Eric. So it's a great opportunity to sit with John to hear more about the step two paper, mapping transaction flow for aiding zero trust. So this is based on the five-step process mentioned in the ZT NASDAQ report. So interested to discuss more about the paper that we have created for CSA and to see what other opportunities that we have to aid this paper, enhance this, and help organization to adopt this. So with that said, what we have today is the agenda for today is to get an intro about the ZT implementation methodology, and then talk about this particular paper overview of transaction mappings, and then the techniques that we've been discussing in this, and then the challenges, especially for non-IT environments, and what are the other techniques that we can leverage to ease the implementation by using AI, automation, etc. And then the process maturity, which is one of the important topic. And then finally, how it aids the ZT architecture implementation. So why mapping transaction and how it aids ZT architecture implementation. So how does it look, John? Does it look like a good flow?
Yeah, looks like a great flow.
Fantastic. Yeah, so this is the five-step process for zero trust implementation. CSA has created and recorded fireside chat with John on defining the protect surface, which went really good. There has been a lot of downloads and good responses on that. And this is an to tackle the second step, which is mapping to transaction flow. So once we have defined the protect surface and identified the DAAS elements, the next step would be to leverage the DAAS elements, do a little more understanding about the DAAS elements, the list of DAAS elements, its interaction with external and internal, and then derive the transaction flow, which is used to aid in building the zero trust architecture with various techniques that would come up in the next paper. And the step 4 and 5 are creating the zero trust policy for the ZT architecture and then operationalize it using monitor and maintain the network.
So yeah, it'd be good to get a little background on the five-step method that is documented in the NSTAC report, and prior to that, and some of John's other work, and also because the CSA is leveraging it heavily for sort of guiding us, providing practical guidance. It's a step-by-step flow for a lot of our different zero trust guidance. So John, could you give us a little background on this?
Yeah, sure. I created Zero Trust really starting in 2008. I started the primary research and even started building prototype networks before creating the first paper, which was called No More Chewy Centers, came out in September of 2010. So we're coming up on 15 years. And early on, zero trust was not a hot topic. In fact, as I've said many times, people thought I was literally crazy, but that was a great gift because I was able to work on a lot of very important projects for early adopters where I got to make mistakes and then fix them and then document them and learn from them and create things like this methodology. So what I was looking at was, for example, what does every zero trust implementation I've done have in common, right? And it actually had steps 1, 3, 4, and 5 in common at first. And then at one point we were working on a big restaurant chain, their point of sale terminal system, to put it into a zero trust environment for creating a PCI compliant system. And one night, somebody in IT pulled out a server from the system because it was old, which was the justification. It was an old server, except it was integral to the system, and it brought the whole network. It brought the whole network down. They couldn't process credit cards, so the restaurants had to shut down. Some 3,000 to 4,000 of them, and there was an emergency meeting, and this person was trying to claim that it was zero trust fault. And we're like, well, no one believed that. Why'd you take out the server? Because it was old. And so I realized nobody knew how the system worked. I asked the guy, what did it do? Well, I had no idea. It was just, we shouldn't have a server that old in the system. Well, that's not the right answer. So then I injected Step two, mapping the transaction flows so that you can understand how the system works together as a system, because we're trying to protect, not just the DAAS elements, right? And as I said in the previous discussion, really the first step was define your data back in the early days. And then people said, we can use this for more things. So it became, well, some assets and some applications and some services. So that's where DAAS comes from. Everything came out of experience, right? Not academics. And so then I said, okay, clearly we need to protect not just the DAAS elements, but the system itself. And in order to protect the system, we have to understand how the system works together as a system. That's the goal of step two.
Excellent.
Wonderful.
And the step one document that John referred to, we are in the process of producing guidance for each one of the 5 steps. The Define Your Protect Surface document has been published. This is the second, and the steps 3, 4, and 5 are in process.
Fantastic. It's great to hear from the author of how it originated. So thanks on that, John.
Yeah.
So yeah, so as Eric said, so this is based on this step 2 document, transaction flow mapping. So what we do here, so this is from the step. So we take the details from the step 1 document, where in the step 1, they divide the organization into multiple DAAS elements. Protect surface, which has DAAS elements in each of it. So what we take is that as a prerequisite, and then we use the DAAS elements, which stands for data, application, assets, and services, for all the protect surfaces, including the ones for backup, disaster, require. And then we prioritize the top ones, the critical ones, take one, and then try to establish deeper understanding of it. In which what we would do, we would identify the DAAS application, understand all the application that it has access to, understand all the users of the DAAS elements and the protect surfaces. So once we collected the assets, which is the application, data, infrastructure, and once we identify the users of the protect surfaces, the next step would be to understand the interactions of each one between itself and also with the external organizations, with which you can able to establish the business contact of the protect surfaces, which would definitely aid in having more deeper understanding and then establishing the fine-grained closer ZT controls. So that's the overview we have set here, and would be looking for John to see like if we have missed anything and if you want to add anything on the why we need a transaction flow.
Yeah, you need a transaction flow, again, to have system knowledge, to have visibility. We lack visibility. And, the architecture itself is flow-based architecture, right? You look at how the system moves, or the packets move, and that tells you where you need to architect at least the controls, right? You're assuming that you have a system where the packets flow for the purposes of the transaction occurring properly, but it may not be secured properly. And so that's why you have to have that kind of understanding. And it was very hard to get. Early on, this was a very manual process where we had to bring in consultants, and they would create these sort of manual Visio diagrams that were at best an approximation of things, and that would start to tell you where you needed to put the controls, because the goal of the transaction flow exercise is to give you insight into how to architect the environment. When it's done properly, it's like, it's a map, right? And so a map tells you, here's where I am, and here's where I need to go, and here's the thing that I don't have, And so that's why I started doing that years and years ago. And over these last 15 years, what's been amazing is how we went from a very manual process to more and more automation. That's where the fact that the idea hasn't had to change, but the technology has gotten better and better. So, in my own life, I've done a lot of IPS in line to get just flow visibility. I went to Palo Alto Networks. The primary reason was flow visibility. I'm over at Illumio now. Primary reason, flow visibility, along with some of the other architectural components. But flows are the key. If you don't have them, if you don't know them, you're probably going to fail.
Excellent. And in terms of like terminology, in the NSTAC report, we talk about transaction flows. There's like some NSA guidance out there. I think it talks about data flows. In other places, talk about information flows. It's really all the same thing, right? It's just
It's all the same thing. How does stuff that you need to have a transaction move from one place to another, right? And so whether because it's all those things at the same time. There's some data there, and that data is a transaction, and I just called it a transaction primarily. And here's where language becomes historically important, because if I called it a data flow, some people who might be in the OT space would go, well, I'm not involved in data, even though they are transacting data. So you have to sometimes think about the nuances of language.
right. In financial sector, folks think about transactions is financial transactions, which it's not that either, right?
Right. So a lot of words mean different things to different people, and a good rule of thumb as you go through life is, you don't have to know what every acronym is and what every term means. Just say to somebody, what does that mean to you? Because that particular term has a lot of different meanings in this world, and there's a lot of acronyms that are the same, that it could be in one thing in one part of IT and another thing in another part of IT, and we can get confused thinking we're all talking about the same thing when in fact we're talking about different things, because an acronym or a term means different things in one part of the business than another.
Right.
And oh, by the way, Eric, I do have an image of the very first transaction flow map that I had done by Deloitte 15 years ago, if you wanted to insert it into the video. This image is an example of the very first transaction flow map that I had done. I had to have a third-party consulting company come in, interview people, and then make a manual document that diagrammed the transaction flow. It's been a long time since I've had to do that, thankfully, but for just pure historical stuff, this image will give you an example of how it all started.
Right.
Yeah.
I used to work in the bank and we do those kind of diagrams. We ended up calling them spaghetti diagrams. But
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And we'd be interested to see like, if there are any tools, or if we have more recent examples as well, John. So maybe we can provide as an example to people how it all started 2 years ago and how it is now, because there isn't just one rule for this needs to be your transaction flow document. It's based on however they can start and identify all the components and then derive interactions between each of them. So maybe if we can show some various examples, that would definitely be useful.
So just for historical sake, this is an image or part of the image of the very first transaction flow mapping that happened a long time ago, probably 12, 13 years ago. I don't remember the exact date. This is a manual transaction flow. It was done by a third-party consulting company who came into an organization that I was working at, and we needed this. I was doing the design work, and I needed the transaction flow mapping. As we've already stated, I explained why. The system went down, so I was going to do this. And so the way this was done is all these key stakeholders for every single system were interviewed. This took several months to do. And then this manual diagram was created. And this has been cleaned up and anonymized. But you can kind of see where it started. Now from there, we're starting to automate this. And so an example here at Illumio, we have automation that starts to, at a very high level, give you that. But just an interesting one from Illumio, I'll just show you one that I've done. This is just a part of one of them that I screen captured, because as we had deployed the Illumio, what are called VENs, virtual enforcement nodes, and they started propagating the telemetry and building this map automatically. You could see here, if you can see my cursor, it showed us the point of sale application. It knew that it was a point of sale application by reading the metadata and the traffic. And so right away, that tells us this is step one, right? And so now we know the DAAS element in this database. There's a database here. So that DAAS element must be the credit card data, PCI data. So now we have step one done. We have step two, which is the transaction flows. You can see the transaction flows coming in and out. Step three, we've started step three because we've already installed the VEN, the virtual enforcement node. It's in visibility mode, but it could be turned into enforcement mode. In fact, it has in this example, because you can see step four, which is the policy. Here we've got a green line. That means we've got an allow rule set up. We've got red lines. That means that there's attempted connections that are being denied because there is no rule. And we've got these amber rules, these amber lines, which are rules that probably need to be taken a look at and looked in more detail. So when you have these kinds of transaction flows, they can turn into architecture very, very quickly.
Sure. So in addition to what you said, people have been asking about, hey, now I know my system, and then I know how to build a ZT architecture because John, and then John has created an ZT architecture, and there has been various guidances from NIST and then other DoD, where they know how to define the architecture. People have been questioning about why I need to understand the transaction. I think you have given an good background of, if you didn't know your system, if you didn't know your interaction, it's kind of like less effective to derive a ZT controls and architecture. So what we have added this slide is that, like, what does the transaction for mapping help you with? So it help you to understand a deeper understanding of your protect surfaces, of what are the components, what are the functions of each components, why we need to do that, or maybe why we do not need any components that's been sitting there for no reason. So do a deeper dive of that. Even if you want to define an architecture, even if you want to like remove one or the other, start with understanding deeply, and then define your ZT controls based on its importance, it's the data that it handles and how critical it is. And then as far as the output, we say that like we'd be getting the transaction flow mapping document, which helps you in many things. And then you'd be able to redefine your risk classification, whereas in initial stage of identifying the protect surfaces, you have defined a risk based on what you know at the initial stage. But when you do deep dive understanding, you can able to justify and even have option to change the classification based on its function, based on a data, etc. And then third, you might be having your protect surfaces components for no reason. Maybe it aids value or maybe it doesn't. So this helps you to understand each and everything with which you can refine the protect surfaces and then define your complete suite of ZT architecture. Anything you want to add, Eric?
I was going to say, and define things at a more granular level, right? What are the most critical DAAS elements, maybe where the single points of failure, those kind of things, as you dive into it. Because step one, taking that broader look across the organization, you're not necessarily doing a deep dive into every protect surface. Whereas step two is the first time you're doing that deep dive into the one you've picked for this particular iteration.
Yeah, I have a very good friend, who is a former Navy SEAL, and when he's asked, what was your favorite weapon to take into combat, which is a sort of natural question you would ask somebody like that, he always says a map, and that freaks people out. A map, because they're anticipating all these weapons that you have as a Navy SEAL, and you say a map is your favorite weapon. How is that? Well, he likes to say that there are two things you can be in combat. You can be wrong and you can be lost. And he'll tell you that he's been both. And it's much better to be wrong than lost. Because if you're lost, any direction you go could be the wrong way. If you're wrong, you can just look at a map and figure out the right way. So if you have a map, you know where to go, where the enemy is. We have an enemy. We have these cyber attackers. And so if we have a map, we can understand what they want to get to, what we need to do to protect them. And we can, because we are cyber warriors, we can use that map to defend ourselves against these attacks. And so in many ways, our most important weapon is a map as well.
Good point.
That's an interesting analogy. Yeah, I love it. Moving on, so how to map transaction flows? Again, there has been various ways to do that. The best possible recommendation that we have laid out based on what you have called out in the NASDAQ report and other references, John, is that like start with your product surfaces, identify its users, identification of connection between the DAAS elements and their dependencies. So identifying dependencies is one of the key pieces that we are calling out here. Know who your DAAS elements are talking to, derive that. And then once you identify the users and then the DAAS elements and their dependencies, establish the connection between each of it. The DAAS elements with other product surfaces components, DAAS elements with users, and then DAAS elements with external services like third-party API and other services within the organization in other business units. And then using that, examine the transactions and their intended purpose, which would give you a complete map of your transaction flows. As far as the approach, well, there have been various ways. What we talk about is a comprehensive system analysis, which you would dig deep in the next few slides, where we talk about start simple with what you know already, meaning the organization might have data flow diagram, network diagram, architecture diagram, like many things. Start with what you know, do a comprehensive analysis of all of that in partnership with the stakeholders, which is a key thing because they are the one who help you understand the business context of it, with which you can develop the transaction flows. And other thing that we talk about is leveraging the scanning tools. So there has been various scanning tools that the organization use it for various reasons. And surprisingly, it has a lot of transaction flow document, which can be used to derive your transaction flow mapping document.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the more automated you can get this, the better. That's the goal, because you're mapping something that is automatic, which is the flow itself. It's just going to come across your network whether you're doing anything or not. So get in the middle of that somewhere and figure out what's going on. Where's it coming from? Where's it going to? Why is it doing what it's doing? You know, what kind of protocol is it using? All the things that you need to have visibility, because this is very much tied to visibility, and visibility is certainly something that you need much more of, right? Visibility is like cowbell in that Saturday Night Live skit. I need more cowbell, right? So if you've never seen that Saturday Night Live skit with Will Ferrell and about cowbell, look it up. But visibility is like cowbell. And so you need to have more and more and more of it. You can never have enough visibility.
Absolutely.
Indeed.
So yeah, this is the first technique that we talk about, the comprehensive system analysis, where we just provide references here. Hey, you might have stakeholders already. The key stakeholders are business system owners, network architects, application architects, enterprise architect, and then related business representatives like SMEs and other folks. Try to include everyone, probably all of them, or maybe whoever is the response to your organization. And then the next one is try to leverage the existing document that you might have. The organization might be having one or multiple of this, like user interaction diagram, network diagram, application architecture diagram, API documentation, data flow diagram, and that could be many more. Leverage this document, do a proper thorough analysis, and then in partnership with stakeholders, define the transactions entry and exit points, which could be with services, with user interactions, APIs, and then use that understanding to derive the flow, where we talk about what are the different interactions, why does it happen, what is the level of data it has, whether is it authenticated, so collecting the security details like what authentication details uses, what protocol does it transacts with, and is it secure, etc., with which you could able to have like proper understanding of the transactions, and you can able to build it. So this not just provide the interaction, but also other security features, as I said, like protocols, channels, like authentication, authorization pieces, etc., with which the ZT architecture can be developed.
And this is all something that as you do it, you will feel it, right?
Exactly.
It's hard to read about some of this stuff and maybe go through a course and really get it. Zero trust, I always say, is experiential. Once you experience it, man, that light bulb will go on, folks. So just get in and start doing it. That's my best advice.
Oh yeah. That's a good piece of advice. People may initially be scared about starting with this, as the concept might seems to be complex, but it is not. As they try to understand the architecture and then the transactions, it might get easier and interesting. And then the next one is the second technique that we talk about, John. So leveraging the concept of automation, what you just elaborated, right? So the organization might be using already tons of logging analysis and other type of network scanning tools, which they can leverage. They do not have to start from scratch or maybe start with purchasing new tools. They can leverage the existing tools. And we talk about how the different tool collects a different set of information, how that can be consolidated, and then with which they can derive the transaction flow. For example, application monitoring tools, where it kind of track into the transaction flows, it transacts the path and it monitor the transaction performance, and then network monitoring tools, which many organizations use it to, monitor their traffic, analyze the traffic, which should provide the protocol details, the data exchanges, the entry exit points, and then the header and other type of the structure of the transaction, and then the log analysis tools. And then people have been using the asset discovery tools, especially in OT and IoT systems. And then the data flow mapping tools like microsegmentation tools, and some of which are Illumio, VMware, BRNI, Cisco Secure Workload. So there has been various tools that organizations have been using it, with which could be a good start for the organization to create their transaction flow mapping. So do you want to add anything on this, John?
Yeah, I mean, I just don't see how you can do it in the modern world at the speed in which we're doing things without doing it in an automated way. So figure out the best way that's automated based upon the tools that you have or the tools that you want to get. I've done it multiple different ways in my career. When I was at Palo Alto Networks, I could put a Palo Alto Networks next generation firewall in transparent bridge mode and get the visibility that way. When I was at Ontoit, a managed service, we used APIs to pull the transaction files and event files directly from technology, and then use software to combine them to create transaction flows. I now work at Illumio. We have a little application that orchestrates some of the technology in the operating system that automatically builds those transaction flows. So there's multiple ways that you can do it, and there's no one right way. You want to leverage certainly anything that you have that is already there. Sometimes you may have to go out and acquire something, but it's important enough for the long-term health of your business, both from going into a zero trust environment, but also just having the visibility, because this is also, the other benefit is visibility, which you need in order to protect yourself. You cannot protect that which you cannot see.
Right. But are there visibility challenges when a lot of the flows are encrypted? And do some of the tools address that?
There are some visibility challenges, mostly from what is going on in the payload. Typically, the header is not encrypted. And so the header gives you the, source destination. It tells you the protocol. It tells you a whole bunch of things. Now, there's some people who are trying to create new protocols that encrypt the header, which will make some things more difficult. And I don't know that it gives us any real security value. I mean, there's a lot of movements to encrypt everything, and there's some things that we just need to see in order to have visibility so that we can protect it. So, but in general, encryption does not cause a problem with step 2. It may cause more issues in step 4 and 5 if we can't look at the payload and see whether there's malware inside the payload, if you can't do deep packet inspection on the payload. And we're seeing more and more of that, where it's banned either because of government policy, because there's certain places where you can't inspect traffic, or company policy, or just the way the technologies are being built. This is actually an advantage for the attackers, unfortunately. So I don't know that it's given us, we think it's given us privacy. I think there's probably an unintended consequence from it.
Got it.
And then the next thing we would want to talk about the challenges here. So what are the different challenges in mapping the transaction flows? We have captured some of which, and based on your vast experiences, John, definitely you can add please. So what we have seen is that like organizations are moving more and more into hybrid environments, which is inevitable. They have their on-premise environment, cloud environment, OT and IoT environment, edge. So there are, the applications have been scattered in the various regions. So one of the things that people have been raising concern about is how do we collect and consolidate the transaction from this hybrid environment? The reason one being it's complex by itself. Number two, it's difficult to understand the interactions of some of the like applications sitting in edge or OT, IoT environment, where it has your different set of protocols, tools, etc., and how we can consolidate that. So we talk about changing the parameter, using some of the tools to changing the parameters and then consolidate them. That might be one. And we also talk about leveraging automation and then the fast-moving AI ML technology tools, which might help in easing the complexity, where the model can be trained to understand the transactions and then track it and then identify any kind of anomalies. So what do you think about the other challenges that people might be seeing and how they can mitigate that?
Yeah, the challenges really relate to what tools they're using. Sometimes, especially, in these environments we're talking about, cloud and IoT and OT, you may not have native tools, or the native tools may not be good enough. So in the cloud, for example, you might use Wiz or Illumio's Cloud Secure that will give you that kind of stuff. In the OT environment, you might think about using something like Dragos or Aramis or something, and so there's other things that you can do to get that visibility. So you can't just rely on maybe your existing network security stack. You're going to have to look at, what is my goal and what tooling do I need to do to get to that goal? It's the same as if you were, working on your car engine and you go, well, I need, a 10 millimeter socket and I don't have one. So I'll just try to make it work with a pair of pliers, and it's never going to work, right? So you go out to the store and you buy a 10 millimeter socket. You got to do the same thing in this environment. You have to have the right set of tools, not for the purposes of just having stuff and buying things, but for actually achieving objectives.
Okay, fantastic. Moving on, so we talk about once the transaction flow mapping has been created, what next? How it can be leveraged to, like it's kind of like a reinforcement learning technique that's been frequently spoken in AML languages, right? How we can use that knowledge that you have derived from transaction mapping to refine your protect surfaces. You know what are the different DAAS elements, it interaction with which you can understand the purpose of each, do the impact assessment to see if you have had the right risk rigor, maybe update it based on the level of data and the criticality of data that it handles. Maybe what systems are functioning or what systems might not be used at all, with which you can do more deeper dive analysis, either to continue using the system or rotate that. So what we suggest here is that refine your protect surfaces based on the deeper understanding that you have derived from transaction flow mapping. So what do you think on this, John? What are the things that they can use it for refining their protect surfaces or any other activities?
Yeah, I mean, each of these steps is always iterative. right? So we're going to take everything that we learn and we're going to re-inject back into it. When we do the step 5 thing, we'll talk about how this falls under the concept of anti-fragility. But as a transaction is happening, you can capture the information about it, the data about that transaction. That's known as the metadata. You can put it into a database, you can leverage AI and ML, and then you can learn from that and you say, oh, I need to do this to make the system better and better, which will give you a new transaction flow map or an updated one. And so all these things are really important. Metadata is incredibly powerful, and it's something that we don't leverage enough in this industry. We create a lot of it and it just sort of sits there because we don't have the engines yet to really leverage it. I know when I was at Onto, a managed services company, we leveraged metadata all the time. Every transaction went through what was called the Zero Trust Contextualization Engine, where either the metadata was read and something was done with it, or metadata was injected based upon other elements that were coming in to give more context, so that we could leverage which was functionally a machine learning system to determine whether traffic should be allowed or not. And so this is where we're getting to these almost nirvana type moments where we're going to really automate cybersecurity in ways that we hadn't ever imagined that we could do 10 years ago.
Right. And since each step feeds the next step, the more complete, more accurate data that you have coming out of the step 2, the better job you can do in defining your architecture and implementing it in steps 3 and beyond, right?
Right. And don't think of this as something that you do sequentially. And so we're just going to learn about step 2 here and not think about steps 3, 4, and 5, because you have to have some knowledge of to even understand step 2. So make sure you've gone through and taken some of the courseware and the classes, and these fireside chats are just to have a deep dive into some of these topics, but make sure you know about all 5 of the steps because they're designed to work as a singular whole.
And then here we talk about the process maturity, right? We do not expect all our organization to be at the optimized stage. So maybe what we suggest is that here is that for the process maturity, we took the framework based on the NASDAQ report: initial, repeatable, defined, managed, and optimized. Start simple, maybe start with something initial with what they have, and then make the process to be more repeatable. So define using tools like automation, which you talked about, which make the complex environment, eases the transaction flow for complex environment, and then make it more managed by creating policies and other steps, and then have an optimized way so that it's kind of like standardized and automated across all platform and locations.
Yeah, absolutely. You're trying to have the most mature system that you can, and maturity is something in Zero Trust that we can easily map, we can easily measure. And in fact, I wrote an article about that. It's on the cloud security website, and we'll link to that in this video. But maturity is a great way to understand how well you're doing, because I can look at a particular protect surface, and if I say that has a low maturity, say that maturity is a 2, repeatable, but I want it to be defined 3, I can focus some specific efforts just on improving that one protect surface to move it from a 2 to a 3. And so I can understand how well I'm doing instead of just trying to generally say, well, I'm going to make everything better. Let's make this one thing better. And then ultimately, that if I do that enough times, everything gets better.
Right. And that's consistent with our guiding principles for Zero Trust of iterative and incremental. So it's both iterative over different protect surfaces, but also incremental, working your way up the maturity model ladder, both in terms of the security maturity of your protections and controls, but also your process maturity as an organization, right?
Absolutely.
And as far as the people to start with, let's say for a bigger organization with thousands of assets, uh, what do you recommend to start with, John? I've seen people having a practice of starting with their critical infrastructure, or people starting with one business unit and expand to other. So maybe there are various ways that people think to do, but what is your recommended approach for the organization to start and achieve the broader enterprise-wide implementation?
Well, if you've heard me talk much, you know about the zero trust learning curve. So we start with something that has low sensitivity, right? We want to start with what's called a learning protect surface, something that if we make a mistake, there's no harm, no foul. You don't get into trouble, and that is what people tend to make a mistake on. Is they go for those high value assets first, and they may not understand how those are working, and they may not even do step two, and so then there's a failure, and of course they have to blame the zero trust project. Well, that was a failure. No, you didn't go through the steps. You didn't go through the process, and you started in a place that we tell you explicitly, don't start there. Learn to do this, right? I mean, we're in playoff season and we're getting ready to go into playoff season in football. You know, if it's the first time you've ever played American football, and you just now got your pads and your helmet, your first game before you even practice shouldn't be in the Super Bowl, right? It just shouldn't. And so this is the thing. You know, people try to go too big too fast, and it doesn't matter where you start. It just matters that you start. So I just tell people, start wherever you're comfortable, wherever you have the best understanding of how the system works together as a system, where you have the best transaction flow map. That's probably the best place to start. That's why this is so important.
Right. And a lower risk of disrupting system operations.
Yeah, absolutely.
We cover that in the step one document, defining the protect surface. The learning curve is covered in there as a reference for folks.
Yeah, and when you look at that, remember, if you do this right, even if there is a disruption, you're only disrupting one protect surface. You're not disrupting the whole environment. And so it's designed to be non-disruptive in general, so that if one thing goes down, you know, you have a way to recover quickly, but it didn't take everything down, like what happened, you know, some 13 years ago at a restaurant chain in my world, where you know, that was pretty devastating.
Sounds like it.
Yeah. Moving on, what we talk about in the paper is having a final call out of how this transaction flow mapping aid in building the ZT architecture. So the better you understand each DAAS elements and its transaction, it helps in many things. For example, defining the micro-segmentation, where you need to understand how the transaction flows, all the entry-exit points, so that you can able to, you know, like curve it to define your firewall and then micro-segmentation. It aids in instance responses. It aids in understanding the risk regard, and then define your ZT policy and a lot many things. So we are calling out how the defining and the mapping the transaction flows aids in deeper understanding of a system, which helps in placing the right security controls for the ZT architecture.
Right.
Absolutely. In fact, it's pretty magical. The first time that I did it, I went, whoa, oh, I need a control there, and I need to do this kind of thing here. I need to have a, you know, it was for a PCI thing. So in order to meet 6.6, here's where I need to put my web application firewall, right? Here's where I need to put a traditional firewall. Here's where I need to put some endpoint controls. It shows you that instead of you just trying to guess. You have the map shows you, you know, it's almost like, oh, we need to put, you know, a gas station here because we're going to run out of gas because there's not enough, you know, on the road there's not enough, there's no gas stations between point A and point B, and we don't have enough large enough gas tanks. So before we take this journey, let's go build a gas station. It's kind of that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
Yep, and that's in terms of the step 3, building zero trust architecture guidance document is definitely, that's one of the key themes there is, remedying or enhancing the weak spots that were identified in step 2, and then also setting your target maturity level as an organization, because you're not necessarily going to go from, say, initial to optimal in one step also.
No, you're not. You're not going to go from initial to optimal in one step. It's going to take time, more than you want, less than you think.
Mhm.
Absolutely. And here is the conclusion. And then we have a bunch of things that we wanted to discuss with you on this, John. So moving on to that, so discussion topics. So some of the things that we have. So while we are trying to define the transaction flow mapping document, which means we'll be collecting some of the key sensitive proprietary information, is there a possibility of having any kind of security and privacy in this process, which we need to be careful about?
Well, in general, when we're mapping the transaction flows aren't necessarily proprietary information. Now, some of the flow data, themselves may contain payloads that have proprietary data, and you need to think about that. But you're really looking at, where is this coming from? Where is this going to? Who is using it? Those more simple questions, really. And you're not getting into what's inside the payload. Is there malware here? Is somebody stealing data? Is there exfiltration? That's steps 3, 4, and 5. So step 2 is just to get the roadmap, so I know where to put the controls in place, so I can write the policy, so then I can take all of that telemetry and monitor and maintain it. And so, I don't think that there's really proprietary or sensitive or data in there. I don't see many privacy concerns. Some people, take everything a little bit too far and think that all of that data is private data. But if you take that approach, then you can never actually architect a system. If every IP address is PII, well, then we might as well give up. So, there's ways in which the protocols work, and we need to understand those things, and those are well documented and well known. Everybody knows the answer to that, and so we're just leveraging that knowledge to map out how things work together and interact with each other.
Absolutely. Okay. And some of the challenges that we've been hearing from people on transaction mapping is that, the rise of remote work, or bring your own device policies, are various third-party integrations that we've been having to partner with the vendors, which makes the transaction flow process a little complex, especially for third-party integration. It might be hard to get all the information from them for effective transaction flow mapping. So what do you suggest on those cases? How we can help mitigate all those challenges?
Well, on the BYOD, typically the endpoint is not the protect surface. It is connecting to a protect surface. So it's not as important to understand. People want to start at the edge and move inward, but in Zero Trust, we start with the protect surface and design outward. So a key tip here is, when you're whiteboard left to right, and draw your protect surface first, and then draw the different, different parts of the transaction, and end up at the endpoint. Whereas traditionally, when we were whiteboarding, we started with, here's the laptop, and then here's how the connection is, because we started from the outside and went inward. In Zero Trust, we start inside and move outward. So it's an inversion of that. And so we don't really have to worry about that. Now, as it relates to third-party integrations, all you can know is how does the transaction start mapping once it hits your systems. But that's what you're concerned about is protecting your systems, your protect surfaces. So you have to ask the question. You don't have to map everything that's going on in their system. All you have to do is say, should third-party system A, user X, have access to my protect surface number one? That's the question. And that's more of a policy statement, step 4 question. And then step 5 visibility, monitoring question than it is a step 2 question. In step 2, we'll say, here is where the third party comes in, right? And here's what it's doing right now. And then as we go through the controls and policy stages, we're going to ask the question, should that be happening? Just because it is happening doesn't mean it should be. So maybe you need to prune some of those connections away.
Absolutely. Yeah. Going from left to right, I think that's inside and outside. So I think that's an interesting thought that you put in. So people, when think about this, they should start with inside and then expand it outside, the interaction. So yeah, definitely. What else? I think we discussed some of the challenges here. So if you want, maybe the final question, right? If you want, for the audiences, if you want to summarize, what is the key objective and what is the key output that you expect as part of this step 2 document, would you define that? What are 1 or 2 objective and then the end output that you would say, John?
The output is to have an accurate transaction flow map for the protect surface we're currently working on. And we don't have to have maps for every protect surface. It's for the one that you're architecting right now, because you're doing this one at a time. Remember, incremental, iterative, so it's non-disruptive. So you don't have to do it for everything all at once. I'm going to do, my cardholder data environment for PCI, or my Swift environment, or my ATM environment, or my wireless environment for my guest network at my hospital. It doesn't matter. Those are examples of protect surfaces. How does the transaction flow mapping, let's do step 2 for that protect surface, because we've identified step 1. And then once we get the correct output for that, that's when we start doing 3, 4, and 5.
Yeah, very good. Okay. I think those are all the open questions that I have, Eric. Anything that you want to add?
No, I just say thank you both very much for all the guidance you've been offering us and all your work on behalf of with this Cloud Security Alliance and on behalf of advancing the adoption, implementation, operation of zero trust environments both in the U.S. and globally. Much appreciated, and look forward to working with you all on steps 3, 4, and 5.
Excellent.
Fantastic. Thanks, John. Thanks, Eric.